Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we discuss the running back bust you must avoid. Dun, dun, dun. And listen, today's show is really about identifying in history, like what things that we can identify preseason to help you avoid busts. Like examples like offensive line play, quarterback changes, offensive line changes, you name it. OC changes. We want to identify these things for you so you avoid those busts so your friends don't make fun of you all season long. So let's get started right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And honestly, a man who I've decided is not a bust, but helps us identify the bust is Ben Wasley. Go follow him on Twitter at Fantasy First Down No O. What's going on, Ben?
What's happening? Good to be here. Ready to talk running backs for a change. It's been a while since we've talked running backs. I'm looking forward to it.
We should only talk about running backs, to be honest with you. I think for views, we should only talk about running backs. Honestly, they're the best shows, and everybody loves them. And honestly, I should have said Ben Wasley, Fantasy First Down, No Window, instead of O. Would have been funny, but no one would have a clue what we're talking about. Yes. Inside joke amongst us, and I don't care that we're live, folks. Ben, today we're talking about four busts. You pick two, I pick two. We're going to talk about those players. But there's one guy that's not on our list that I do think we both agree is kind of a red flag / bust, and it's Breece Hall. You want to give us 2 cents on Breece Hall's situation, why you think you're a little worried about him, and why you might be fading him in 2023?
Yeah, look, I've been worried about Breece Hall ever since the preseason started. Honestly, even since last season ended, I've been worried about Breece Hall. I know a lot of people are very high on him. They see the upside, but he's getting drafted at a point where he's pretty close to his upside as it is. I know that he was up in that high running back one conversation at times last year, but that was already his ceiling. And so you're really drafting him there already. And there's so many red flags. There's a lot of talk about Dalvin Cook going to New York. That would be terrible news. The fact that they drafted an extra running back certainly says something about how they feel about his health. The fact that you've still got Michael Carter and Zonovan Knight there. There's a lot of pieces, and clearly they're trying to find something. If they already believed in Hall as the every down running back, they wouldn't be going searching for free agents. They wouldn't be drafting players. They wouldn't be trying to see what they've got in their backups to the same extent. That's making me very, very nervous, and I'm dropping him down my rankings as a result.
I got to tell you this, too, about the situation is that I think if Breece Hall didn't tear his ACL, we wouldn't be having any of these discussions. But he did. And the other thing about this, too, is the Dalvin Cook stuff. I think it's because they know they have a window with Aaron Rodgers. It's now. It's right now. And they don't want to wait until maybe week 8, 9, 10 for Breece Hall to be ramped up and be closer to 90%. When in reality, they know, let's at least have established 3-down back on the offense with Dalvin Cook. And when Breece Hall's up to speed, great. We could actually lighten his workload, and that will actually help them long term. So I'm out on him 100% this year. The ACL data is not great for returns the first year, so I agree 100% on this one. But let's get into the four we're going to talk about today. And we have a couple interesting ones. The first one is J.K. Dobbins, who's finally, hopefully healthy off that knee injury that kind of plagued him last year. Currently, his ADP is 52, RB 18, according to Razzball ADP data. So tell us why, Ben, you're still fading J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, JK's a guy I've never really understood the hype about. To me, he feels like a role player, and you don't really want your role player as your high RB2 kind of guy. You want your every down options there, the guys that have the upside of possibly being a top 10 running back. I don't see that with JK, and it's really the lack of ceiling that makes me nervous. I could imagine him finishing as the RB18, though he's never done it before. He was the running back 36 last season in points per game. He was the running back 33 in the only other healthy season he's played. We still don't know exactly how healthy he is, and he's never completed a full healthy season before. He's only got 29 career receptions. We know Todd Monken's going over there, and he'll have a well-balanced offense, but he's also going to want to get pass-catching backs out on the field as much as possible so that he can run no huddles, so that he can actually use them. I don't think Dobbins is that guy. I can see them trying to bring Melvin Gordon in now that he's there. Gus Edwards hasn't disappeared. He's going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting as well. I'm worried about the volume. I'm worried about the efficiency dropping if they change his role slightly. I'm worried about his health. And honestly, I don't really see the upside for where you're drafting him.
I agree, because over the last few seasons, even prior to the injury, like he was like a 1A back, and Gus Edwards was still getting a decent amount of work. And like you could see it in his points per game. Like he's basically a 0 in the passing game. And listen, Todd Monken's coming in, and I understand that. But if you look at Todd Monken from his time in Tampa Bay, the lead backs were Doug Martin and Peyton Barber. They were not getting 70 targets. The guys who were leading ball carriers were not getting heavily targeted. And it's mostly because Todd Monken's offense was able to spread around through the receiving corps with early Chris Godwin, Deshaun Jackson, Adam Humphries, Mike Evans. And you're going to see something very similar in Baltimore. They have 4 very competent pass catchers in Andrews and the 3 wide receivers. So I don't think they need to target their running backs. And Lamar Jackson's still Lamar Jackson. If he's under pressure, he's not going to check it down. He's going to take off and run. But if you just look at the last 9 games last season in 2022, he was averaging 12.7 PPR points per game. That would have been RB23 last year. And that's like he started and he had some really big rushing games in that sample. So I'm still kind of thinking of him as like a low-end RB2 with limited upside because no passing game role. And I still think Gus Edwards is going to be a thing. So I actually agree with you on this one. Let's jump down to the next one. Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is the ADP 33rd overall, RB13. So what worries me about Travis Etienne is that we're starting to notice a theme with the Jags. Like last season, Travis Etienne came out of college. He's a passing game back with Clemson. And we thought, oh, that's going to be great. He's going to get all these receptions. Well, that didn't happen at all. And this season, now you have Calvin Ridley, who's a target hog. And I know you're different on Ridley than I am, but Ridley is just adding to that receiving core. And now you have Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, and also Zay Jones. I just don't think they need a true passing down back. I think there's plenty of weapons in the passing game. And now you factor in they took Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round, who, by the way, is getting all this hype and all this conversation, all this talk. It just makes you think, okay, are they going to give Travis Etienne 15 to 20 carries per game? So I was just looking at his stats last year. When you look at after week 4, there's 12 games that he played, essentially over 50% of snaps. He averaged 14.9 PPR points per game. That's really good. That would have been RB11 last year, but running back scoring was down last year. In 2021, that would have been RB7. In 2020, would have been RB16. I feel like that's where I'm starting to feel comfortable with Etienne. Like if he starts falling a little bit to the middle of the RB2 range, that's where I feel comfortable. Right now, he's going at RB13. Like he's a borderline RB1. And if you look at last season, in the games that I just talked about, he had 185 carries. The entire rest of the running backs only had 79. And I just think that Bigsby is probably going to offer him a little more competition. And when you look at him only having 45 targets in 17 games last year, I have a little bit of hesitation to think he's going to get more targets. He's going to get more carries with this new competition. And then now you're also dealing with the fact that they have 2 offensive linemen. Both tackles are going to be not starting the year. One's gone in Kansas City. The other's suspended. And they have a bottom 10 offensive line according to PFF. So it's like this is probably going to be Trevor Lawrence's offense. And I just don't think it's going to be Travis Etienne. So that's my thoughts about why I'm fading him at his current ADP. What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I totally agree. He's a guy I was really high on to start the offseason. I think I had him as high as running back 10, but he's been dropping consistently for me. I really don't like a lot of the talk coming out of Jacksonville around him. The idea that they brought in Bixby was really concerning. It does suggest they weren't really happy with their backups, and that makes sense. And Etienne is always going to be a bit of an injury risk because he has so much wear on his tires from college anyway. But bringing in D'Ernest Johnston is another guy they've talked up as well. They talk about their running back room as being one of their strongest. But the thing that scares me most is from Etienne himself, where he said that you kind of need to use a running back by committee approach in the NFL these days. And that's what he wants. He wants to keep the wear off himself so he can stay healthy, so he can keep playing. He recognizes that he needs to be around for the postseason. He knows they're going to probably be in the playoffs. And so he doesn't want to be running the ball too many times each week. offensive coordinator and the coaching staff don't either. The fact that they don't want to use him like that is a big problem. If they did use him like that, he's capable of doing that. He would be very effective. But the fact is that no one involved wants to do that. So we see this upside and we go, gosh, if they really let him loose, this guy could be a league winner. But they're not going to let him loose. And so for that reason, don't draft him as if they are. It might turn out that because of injuries to the backups, they just kind of have to use him a lot. But realistically, I think it's more likely that he's going to be one of those like mid-range running back 2 guys. So you've got to draft him that way.
Yeah, I think the other aspect, just remember Doug Peterson's shenanigans with running backs. Like, it's like the coaching staff sometimes will tell you they're like, hey, we like to rotate backs. Doug Peterson did it for a long time with the Eagles. So just be aware of that when drafting Etienne at RB13. Just remember last year, he was like the RB24 in PPR points per game. So just remember that, all right? Let's get down to the next one. This one just hurts me emotionally. And I don't know if we're going to get through this one, but we'll try. Dameon Pierce, ADP 55, overall, RB20. You're saying fade and a bust, young man. Explain yourself.
I don't even slightly understand how this guy's meant to be a top 20 running back. Last season, he was 11th in the league in carries. So he got the volume last season. Keeping in mind, he only played, 12, 13 games? But in those 12, 13 games, he had the 11th most carries in the league. Not per game, in the league. So he had the volume. We know what he can do with the volume. He finishes the running back 25. 11th in carries, 25th overall. That's a really bad sign. He's not efficient. He's not effective. And they showed that in bringing in Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is the 25th highest paid running back in the league. 25th highest in the league. They didn't give him no money. They gave him a reasonable amount of money. It's still backup money, but it's very high backup money. We're in a committee money. We're going to use this guy as well money. Singletary will probably be a change of back pace guy, but he's also going to be the pass catching back. And there's a lot of value in pass catching backs, especially if you're in a PPR league. So they're definitely going to use Singletary. He even gets usage around the goal line, even though he's quite small. So they're going to use him. Pierce will get a lot of early down work, but they don't have Davis Mills throwing the ball anymore. They've got someone competent, so they can actually throw the ball downfield. They've also got better pass catchers in town as well, slightly better pass catchers in town as well. So there's a lot of reasons to fade him. There's a lot of reasons to be concerned. Based on last year's usage, you would think, yeah, sure, he's a mid-range running back too. But there's a whole heap of threats coming in that would suggest maybe we need to drop him down a little bit. And that's what I've done. I've dropped him down a little bit because I just don't see it. He is in a committee. He's not that good. He's a mid-round guy from the NFL draft, and everyone's like, oh, he's amazing. He's not amazing. He's mediocre. Don't draft him.
I hate you. So here's the thing. His situation in 2022 couldn't have been worse. Like, if you just look at the Texans as a whole, they went in the games you just talked about, they won one game. That's it. They went 1-10-1 in the games where he played, right? And so he was dealing with just poor quarterback play, poor offensive line play, and you could tell in the numbers. First of all, I just did an analysis. Go check it out on rouseball.com on those wins matter for running backs. Last year, I just told you they only had one win when he was on the field. Typically, on average, running backs average 3.4 PPR points per game more in wins, okay? And that showed with Dameon Pierce. In his lone win, he played a season-high 79% of the snaps, 26 carries, 99 yards, a touchdown, and 5 targets. So in that win, he was the focal point. Now, the Texans aren't expected to be good, but even Vegas win totals, I'm at 6.5. Which is still 5.5 more wins than last year. And I just think that there's going to be better game flow because of CJ Stroud. That's going to allow him to be on the field a little bit more. But this is the other thing. The offensive line was awful when it came to running backs. So if you look at their adjusted line yards last year, which is how I view running back metrics for offensive lines, they were second in the NFL, second to last in the NFL in adjusted line yards. That's what the push an offensive line gets off the line. Second worst. Now you add in new OC Bobby Slowick, who is from the 49ers scheme, which was 4th last year. So he's going to bring in a much more competent run scheme. But then they also brought over Shaq Mason, who's been historically a very good run blocking guard, and also drafted Juice Scruggs in the 2nd round at center, who's been talked up out of Penn State. So I think that there's a lot of excitement that they made the improvements they need to give him more of a better chance to succeed for fantasy, which is why I'm excited. Final thoughts about Pierce before we move on.
My biggest concern about that is that when you're losing the game, no one's expecting you to run, and yet they're still giving him massive volume. So now if they're winning, the opposition's expecting them to run, and they're going to be defending the run. He was able to run because they were behind, but they were still choosing not to throw and running anyway. And so there's a lot of space open. If your opponent is expecting you to throw, then running becomes a lot easier. If they're expecting you to run, it becomes a lot harder. So I think that might counteract that a little bit, but we'll see what happens.
This is a fun one. We'll see how this one goes. We're gonna have to do another order bet on this one or something.
I was about to say this feels like a bet happening.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I'm excited for it, but I like how. That's why when you put them on the list, I was like, we got to talk about it. All right.
I saw your eyes light up.
I know. I was like, oh no, no, but this is good. This is why we're here, folks. We're here to talk things out. You know what I mean? Now we feel good at we're just gonna bet on it instead.
This is counseling for Bobby and I. We can't afford actual counseling. We do it online.
Yeah. Exactly. Devin Singletary might haunt my dreams this year. All right, let's talk about Rachaad White. And so he's not even going that high, 66 overall, RB24. And so the first thing I always talk about that I like to see is continuity. And there's no team in the NFL that has less continuity than the Tampa Bay Bucks. They have a new OC. They have a new quarterback coming in, potentially. Either way, it's going to be a new starter. And they also have 5 changes on the offensive line, okay? Now, Ryan Jensen, technically, you can't count, but he was hurt last year. He's coming back from injury. Tristan Wirfs was the right tackle, moving to left tackle, and then the 3 other guys on the line are also moving around. They also brought in 2 new players. So they have 5 brand new players on the offensive line. Now you talk about the OC. When you talk about Dave Canales, the good thing about Dave Canales is that historically he's had an RB1. So if you look at Seattle from his time there, Marshawn Lynch, Chris Carson, there's been a lot of scenarios where the RB1 has been featured. However, where they succeeded was on the ground, okay? So Lynch, season high, 48 targets in a season. Chris Carson, season high, 47 targets in a season. When you think Rachaad White, what really got people excited last year was his pass catching prowess, not necessarily his ground game and his rushing ability last year. You could have blamed the Tampa Bay offensive line. I get that, but it was not good. So you're banking on this rushing efficiency that is going to have to deal with all new offensive linemen on the front and a quarterback play that our team's really that concerned about Baker and Kyle Trask. When you also look at Baker Mayfield, if he wins the job, historically, he's been below average at targeting tight ends. I mean, running backs. I know, by the way, seeing a stat out there talking about how Baker Mayfield targeted his running backs at like the highest percentage. I think that has a little bit to do with CMC. Don't you think? Like maybe it's because he was playing for the Panthers. As soon as he went to the Rams, he wasn't throwing to Cam Akers. Like it's not, I think it was a product of having Christian McCaffrey, which is a loophole of this whole thing. Historically, he is not. On average, in his time for the Cleveland Browns, when he was actually a full-time starter, averaged about 104 targets per season. The running backs, the league average during that time frame was 110, so slightly below average. So there's that. The other aspect of this too, though, for Rachaad White is the competition for targets. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Cade Otton, Russell Gage. There's a lot of players right now on the team that are going to demand targets, and I think a lot of running back targets are based on team need versus plan design. I think a lot of quarterbacks target their running backs because they don't have good weapons. And I think that's when you see like Tom Brady, when he had Wes Welker and the 2 tight ends and he had Randy Moss, you didn't see huge passing numbers from passing down backs. But as soon as they lost all those guys, it was James White. So I think that's kind of a product of that. And finally, just want to touch on him as a rusher. Okay. 64th out of 67 qualified running backs last year, according to PFF, in yards after contact per attempt, and 62nd out of 67 in elusive rating. So if he's not going to get the targets, he's also got a bunch of changes around him. And then hasn't been really great as a rusher yet in the NFL. Why are we taking him as an RB2? Thoughts? Tell me, Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm on board with you with this one to some extent. I do think he's too high. I think the industry in particular is too high. His average industry ranking is significantly even higher than his ADP, and I'm lower than both as well. I am very concerned about the quality of the O-line, as you said. I do think he'll get a lot of checkdowns regardless, simply because I'm worried about the O-line and the fact that they just might need to as a result. And so I'm a little bit higher on him in PPR than I am in half PPR. I was a big fan of Rachaad White when he was in college. I had him on my college fantasy team when he was at Arizona State, I want to say. And even then, though, he didn't get a lot of usage. He was rotating with 2 or 3 other backs a lot of the time. I don't know that he can handle an every down running back situation. I just don't know that he's got that in his legs. We haven't seen him be able to do that. And I'm not sure if that's going to affect his ability to perform game in, game out. He's a really good back when you use him sparingly, but as soon as you start to give him a heavy workload, I'm worried about whether he's going to be able to handle it. Chase Edmonds is still there as well. He's nothing fantastic, but he will get used a little bit. So I'm worried about his usage. I'm worried about his effectiveness when he's used. I think the reason people are getting excited is they see a guy who could potentially be a workhorse back, and they think, well, I've got to rank him above the guys who aren't workhorse backs because he does necessarily have more upside because of that role. I don't think that's how you need to be thinking about it, though. You're not talking about this guy as someone who's going to win your league. He's just a guy who you can use in bye weeks, out in your flex, and you need to see him that way. If you're thinking of him as a guy who might win you your league, you're going to be really disappointed.
I think there's 2 ways to look at Rachaad White. If I'm doing an accuracy ranking, I'll probably have him as an RB2 because of the volume. But if I'm talking about a fantasy football draft, I don't care about if he finishes as the RB20 overall, but on a per game basis, he's closer to 30, 35 because that's the difference here. Like he might finish as an RB2 this season because he might play because of the volume, but on a per game basis, I just don't think the offense around him between the offensive line, the changes all around him. I'm not excited to draft him, especially because historically everything's telling me he's going to have to do it on the ground. And it's just like, I just can't imagine him being a 80 target guy in this offense when Baker's never really done that. The offensive coordinator's never really done that. And you got Godwin, Evans, Russell Gage, and K-Dot in there. So I just don't see an option there. So it's like, no, thank you. I'm going to pass. And this is the RB dead zone where I'm probably going to take wide receivers, Darren Waller instead. So that's why I'm going to fade him 100%. All right, that's the RB bust, baby. Go ahead. Last word.
Oh, no, 100%. If you take DeAndre Swift, take Miles Sanders, take someone else you get in the same range with actual true upside on solid or good offenses who have shown they can do it in the past. That's who you take in that area. Or just don't take a running back at all and take your running backs early and late like you should.
Yes, I just got a little sweet on Rashad Penny recently, so we'll talk. We're gonna find an episode at some point to talk about that because I don't know. I feel like I when I think about it at night, I'm like, what are you doing to yourself? Don't do this to yourself, Bob. Don't do the Rashad Penny thing again. But I'm like, it's just gonna make sense. He's gonna be so good. But we're not gonna do it. That's it, folks. We're talking about bust today. That's all we got for today. Now, Ben, before we close out the show, we always like to give you a moment to tell the people what you got upcoming at Razzball or wherever they can find your content. The floor is yours, my friend.
Oh, look, we got it all going on. I'm updating all my rankings at the moment. It's getting into draft season, and draft seasons where the rankings start coming out thick and fast. I'm starting to get a lot more questions out as well. So if you have questions, hit me up on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. Got a lot of articles coming out on Razzball as well. Plus, we've got our personalized ranker. If you're not sure how to rank players during your draft and you're like, do I take a wide receiver or a running back here? Which of these players between positions do I rank better in my specific league? I'm the guy you talk to. I've got something for that as well. So hit me up if you've got any questions. Hit me up if you need help with your drafts. And there is my website right there.
Man, love every second of it. Ben, thank you as always for joining the show today. Make sure you follow us across the board at Razzball Fantasy on YouTube, IG, and TikTok. Make sure you also jump over. If you listen to the audio side, we're on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Spotify. And make sure you go to Razzball.com. We have fantastic writers. We have projections. We have rankings. We have everything you need to win your fantasy league. Once again, I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco. You can follow me at Bobby LaMarco on Twitter. We are out of here, folks.